What's up, YouTube? We're back with some informative videos today. I'm going to talk about compressors in the studio, compressors for mastering. Behind us, well, in front of us, we have a Maslick, we have a Manly, we have a Dangerous. Over here we have a bus compressor, and I'm going to explain to you what we do in mastering. Nothing more, nothing less. I haven't been doing too many technical videos because I've been busy. And I want to get back to my videos, man, because a lot of my business comes from people in the YouTube community, and I thank God for it. I've become more of a mastering engineer, not for just professional recordings from professional studios, but I have become very intrigued by being able to benefit a recording that you may not think was beneficial, like you could actually benefit any further. And one of the things in mastering, and the things that we think about when we think about compression, especially when you're new to it, is you don't really know why you're compressing. And what a compressor does is allows me, I use compression as much as I use EQ. Both of these are used a lot as I slap my feet up on this couch. But when you compress something, you're really in sense using and mastering a sense of control on that. Now, great recordings, we don't have to use stuff like the Maslick that's here. The Maslick is a tri-band compressor. This is a save the session kind of deal for me, and this is used a lot on indie recordings, because what happens in an independent recording is you guys are focusing on the creative side. So you're in there with the band or whatever, and the band keeps going, dude, I want my bass to be big. I want my bass to be big. And before you know it, you're all in there thinking, yeah, it sounds big, but it's not ready for the radio. The reason being is because radios were built with bass and treble knobs. And what we want to do is have a consistent bass. We want that bass to sound good, consistent. What I mean is even. But how do we make the bass sound good even? And that's the question that we have to answer. And to answer that question, 9 times out of 10, it's either a superior amount of EQ in the tracking and mixing, or you do the fail-safe mastering. And what I mean by fail-safe is you control those frequency ranges wherever the crossover points are to where that song sits the best. And a lot of times we'll EQ out bass frequencies that are a little too loud, and then we'll hit it with the compressor. The older I get, the more I've done this, the more I realize how heavy compression is used on major label stuff. Like when I first got into engineering, you know, I heard one engineer and he could throw you way off base, but he's like, you really just want to do in mastering just 1.5 ratios and just really barely touch it. Now, the 1.5 ratio is correct, because you do not want to alter the signal a lot in mastering. We have used, 2 to 1, 6 to 1, 3 to 1, 10 to 1 in mastering, because what they were trying to achieve was not achieved in the mix. A lot of the independent artists we work with, they got it to a point where they were just happy they could record it. They got their song down. And now it's our job to pretty much surgically control frequency ranges with a compressor. So what I want to talk about today is the tri-band, the Manly, the Dangerous, and the bus compressor all in one big video, and why we have these in the studio. So the first one we'll start with is the Dangerous compressor. The Dangerous compressor, and I heard a guy say this on one of my YouTube videos, he goes, every video I've heard of that thing is pumping. It's pumping. The good news about the Dangerous compressor, it was meant to be transparent. It was meant to go from 1.5 to 20 to 1. 20 to 1 is pretty much limiting. That's for every 1 dB over the threshold, where the threshold is, it's going to compress it 20 times that. This can be useful to create very loud sounding music, and limiting is used a lot in today's recording because everybody wants it loud. So by using limiters in the actual recording itself, in the mixing stage, it's used more than you know. And if you're not getting the loudness you want out of your vocals, it's usually probably a limiting problem or a compression problem. And it has to start with EQ. The rule of thumb for me is this: try to EQ a great signal. A lot of times we send vocals or something and we don't hear what's going on really. There's a lot of low-end muffle going on. When we start investigating equalizers, we end up EQing it too much, and then it becomes skinny. Audio is very, very, very touchy. So if you cut out, let's say your vocal just sounds a little too fat, you cut out 180 hertz. You have to know for a fact when you're mixing that by cutting the 100 hertz range, you're actually giving more space to the kick drum. So you go back and forth and you blend this until it happens. Then you find out everything's sitting in the song. Let's say you got guitars and kicks and drums or whatever, but the vocals just sound weak. That is when we want to probably use limiting, or we want to probably use compression, because what we're going to do is control dynamic range. By controlling dynamic range, then we can change the gain. The way your vocals were sitting prior to the compression, you just keep turning them up and down volume-wise, but it was never a volume issue. A lot of times when I master something, stem mastering, a guy's like, can you just turn the bass up? And I'm like, it doesn't work that way. See, the whole entire mix was compressed a certain way, where now maybe we can turn the bass up, and it works in this one, but maybe it doesn't in this one. So it's like this big jigsaw puzzle. So let me get back to it, compression. Number one, we're going to talk about the Mazalik tri-band compressor. It is just a foolproof, superior piece of audio equipment in this studio. The reason being is a lot of independent artists are not professional engineers. So they didn't take the time in the recording, and they didn't understand the mixing process, so they don't really have a mix going on. What I can do in a master for now, which is our flat rate of $75 and $100, that's our flat rate, because we do go above and beyond on this stuff. I can start to surgically solo out bands in your recording. And what's so amazing about this? You send me a recording, you're like, dude, it just doesn't have that kick, man. I like that hip-hop song or this EDM song. What we can do is find the frequencies that are interfering with the kick. So we always think backwards as an engineer. Me, personally, I do. So I find, 250, 300 hertz. I find out 400 hertz is a little heavy. I found out once I control, that range with the tri-band, and I get that sitting right, and even and smooth, or even and punchy, whatever we wanted to do with that, then I notice that the kicks in the low end start to take shape, and they start to become present again. But then what I find out is, oh, okay, now I can hear the bass, and the bass isn't really EQ'd correctly. So we might find out, in one of my videos I talked about, frequencies being 6-7 dBs too loud, and it happens because you didn't hear it, and you just let it go. That guy said no professional engineer would handle that. Trust me, they do all the time if they want to work for indie artists. Indie artists are different than professional studios. You have to understand this, because a professional studio, you are spending a lot of money from the get-go, and those guys better take care of that. So in a sense, the mastering engineer doesn't have to, correct it, just compliment it. But today more than ever, and I love doing it, don't worry about it. Correcting is my job. It's not complimenting. So what we'll do, like I said, I controlled that range, and by controlling, let's say in this song, it just sounded muffled, but I controlled 200, 300, 400, 500 hertz with a multi-band compressor, and it just tightens that range up. So now all of a sudden the bass sounds a little bigger than that range, and then the highs start to take their own shape. But then we start to hear that the highs are a little shrill, so we may use the tri-band and try to smooth that out, or a side chain, and push more frequencies at the top where they are super sharp, and have the dangerous compressor, which we use a lot for, as a de-essing. So it's just taking away that brittle, shrill sound that nobody likes. On the low end, what we want to do is try to address frequencies that are too big or too loud decibel-wise. And by controlling those with the appropriate bandwidth, a little bit too big, it sounds small. A little bit too, narrow, it sounds too big. So it's like this happy medium. We find these frequencies. And now we have a shape to the low end. The next thing that I love doing to the low end is a lot of times I'll set a long attack, short release. The reason I do that is because I want that kick to come through. Other times the song doesn't need it. It needs a lower end, smooth low end, so we might have a 0.3 attack in a longer release. When stuff isn't EQ'd really good, we're going to set really short releases, because we don't want it to just totally muffle the sound. But when we get a nice EQ going, we can set a longer release. It's really crazy. So yeah, you get these evenness going on. The next big principle of compression is you have to have the converters, and you have to have the room to hear it. I learned as a young engineer when I was using 002s and M boxes and all that good stuff. Like, even after school, I didn't know this, but I was like, man, I can't hear it, and I keep going out to my car, and it always sounds like it's overdone, And it's because you couldn't hear it. So you actually, your DA, your digital to analog converter, you end up doing more than you should have with the compressor. Nowadays, I mean, I can hear a 1.5 ratio and just a small amount of compression, and if I bypass it, I can hear it. The room that we're in allows me to do that. The speakers we use, which are Focal Solo 6 and then the JBL 6328s, they allow me to hear that. And then the Symphony I/O that converts back and forth from A to D, A, analog to digital, digital back out to analog. So we hear it. A lot of people talk about plugins. I don't think there's anything wrong with mastering with plugins. But what I found out in my life is there's something about hardware. With this Mazlic, there's no plugin on the planet that can do what this thing does. It does it smooth, it does it accurately, and it does it transparently. What I found out with hardware, I feel like I can get away with more. I can do a lot more to it, and I've learned from experience in this industry, which we call the music business, is your classic songs, your amazing masters, your Grammy-winning engineering jobs, they have some sense of control, or they have a superior amount of time EQing each signal. And when we start talking about budgets and mastering and mixing, you know, it almost gets to the point like, how much do you want to spend? Because we can spend days on this stuff. We can spend weeks on this stuff and just keep surgically fine-tuning, There can always be a tighter image, you know what I'm saying? So let's get back to the compressors, man. I'll flip out and go on a tangent here. I feel like I'm like on a homecoming video. I haven't been around for a while. So let's go to the Manley MU. What does this thing do? It's my first mastering compressor. God willing, it showed up in a store that doesn't even carry this stuff, and I'm a very firm believer in God and Jesus and how He's been a part of my life, you know. And this compressor comes in, and I'm just like, what is this thing? And everybody in the Guitar Center at the time was like standing around. And I think what the Manley, the number one thing that I felt about it is the gain stage and how you turn that input knob just a tad. The whole entire song just has power. It's like, turn it down, less power. Turn it up, more power and presence. So I call it the presence box. Like, you can take a song that sounds like it was recorded, you know, in you and your buddy's basement, and then you just hit it with the dual input of a Manley. Doesn't mean you're a professional engineer or mastering guy, but it just means that anybody could use that and get a better sounding song. I'm not telling you to go out and buy one, because there's a lot of EQ and stuff we want to do before we hit that, but hey, if you want, all else fails. It's a sweet piece of equipment. There's a side chain on it, and it bypasses the lows. The Manley's not known for creating punch on the bottom end. That's where the SSL comes in hand here. But it does do its job by taking, I would say this, the best way to explain the Manley, is you got these big fat vocals, but your band's like, or your artist is like, man, I want to keep it, but it's just so big, it's like, it doesn't sound great. It can take that whole entire image and just glue it all together. And just sit it there and do it in a way that the Fairchild used to do. It doesn't take away from anything, it just makes it sound better. It's one of those boxes, it's really, 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 really warm sounding, and everybody loves warm sounding music. It just takes on its own. It doesn't take away from anything I've ever put through it. I mean, on some instances you might have a guy like an EDM guy that's like, I want it to sound digital. Well, then we're probably not going to use the Manley stuff. But most guys, rock guys, hip-hop guys, they want fat-sounding vocals and bigger-sounding drums. It's the Biganizer, man. It makes things sound huge, but in a smaller space. And that's why it uses vacuum tubes and is one of the biggest compressors on the planet. Next, you have the Dangerous Box. What does this thing do? The Dangerous Box, to me, has become more of like a side-chaining deal and a very small ratio box. I look at it like, if you're going to compare it to a plugin, the Waves R-Comp, which has been one of my favorites for years. It's like the hardware version of the R-Comp. It does what the R-Comp does, just a little more transparently. And what I really like about the box, and I'm going to be honest, I would sell it, but there is so much to it that I wouldn't want to sell it for. The thing is a lot of guys ask me about their stereo image. And they're like, but my stereo image just never sounds good. If I can mess with the phase in a mastering environment, and I can mess with the phase scope and get that kick to sit nice and have everything right in the image, which is a big part of mastering, this box here does this like no other. It's got dual detection, so what's happening is it's not summing to mono and coming back out to stereo. It's literally keeping a left-right balance. So what's so great about that is what I've noticed, anything I run through there, the image becomes better. So it is, for that purpose only, we might run it through there just to have it hit the image. The next thing that I've noticed with that box is how it can really, really benefit the high end. It's got this sheen to it. It's got this like high-end fidelity sound like the Bax EQ. But it does this in a way where you can set it on your master bus and forget about it. The thing that I've really liked it for is when I hear a part of a song that I like what they did, if I'm doing a mix, but I just want to control it without you knowing I control it, that box is perfect for it. It's so transparent that the only thing you could hear if we were overdoing it is pumping. That's what one guy said. So he was like, yeah, I hear pumping in every video. Well, the guys like me are definitely slamming it to the wall. And most videos you'll see on YouTube, we're slamming it for that purpose so you can hear the compression because it's so transparent. But in a mastering situation, to give credit to Dangerous and Chris Mew that made it, this thing's incredible because you can just literally just set it where you want it, put in your smart dynamics, which it's going to detect longer, material in the takes, and it's going to detect, front right now transients and stuff like that. So it like literally is like a all-in-one mastering box. You just sort of set it and forget it with a great mix. If you got a horrible mix, it's going to be pumping all over the place. But that thing is my transparent, hey, I love my mix, I just want it to sound a little cleaner. We're going to EQ up your master, and then we're going to use something like the Dangerous. So there's a tool for everything here. It's not just like, hey, we just slap everything. I got to talk about, oh man, it's compressor day, dude. It's not massive passive day. The next toy in the toy box is, you can look on Google, but it's the SSL bus compressor. Now, a lot of times in hip-hop and EDM and in rock, I use this in the mastering. Why? Because I use it before the mastering chain. I step into the mix a little bit and I realize a lot of guys wish they had a solid state console that they could run their mix through. This is why we bought this piece. The SSL bus compressor is probably one of my favorites. Because it's just this classic sound that all the albums I hear through the years have been through. Green Day to Dr. Dre to, I mean, you can just keep going on and on. And I remember looking at some of the plugins from Waves and stuff like that, and I saw the finalizer setting from Chris Lord-Alge, and I think that's how you pronounce his last name. He's pretty killer at what he does. But I started looking at some of these settings, and I see this 0.3 in auto release. So I've used the bus compressor more to get what people that want me to engineer for, I can get that sound with that bus compressor because that is the sound they want. And it's nuts because I set 0.3 long release threshold and I just see this song just go like from this huge, like it's never going to work in anybody's systems. Bass is too humongous, and the same image, just fatter, tighter, punchier, cleaner, better, powerful, just become industry. Like that, dude. And it's like, we talk about the plugin. The one thing I can't do with the plugin is I can't do this finalizing. I've never ever been able to achieve that with the plugin. I always feel like there's this sheen over it. Like this, it's almost like, I don't know how to say it. It's almost like it masks it or something. Like it doesn't have the power that the hardware has. And then I realize it just flattens it a little more. But here's the great news about plugins. To buy, 20 of those would be super expensive. With a plugin, you could have that on a bus on 4 or 5, 6 different buses in a mix, So I still use the plugin. And we have the Duende bundle. Let me talk about that because those are compressors too. Holy smoke. So what do I use the bus compressor to end this video on the hardware side of this? The bus compressor, I use it on drum buses a lot. Long attack, short release, maybe mid attack, long release, whatever finds its way in the stem session. This is why a stem session costs more money, and it really does value your recordings because I can use the bus on that. I could use the Manly on the vocals. I could use the tri-band maybe on the final master bus of the stem session. I could use the Dangerous on a piano part or maybe a vocal chorus, whatever is going to happen. But let's talk about the Duende bundle. This has the stereo bus compressor. One thing I noticed about this, like I just said, dude, for the price of this compared to that, these are a no-brainer. Solid State Logic makes great stuff. They don't make half-decent stuff. I even had the SSL Alpha channels, and those were great. And those were one of their cheaper, units. But they still had this awesome soft limiter on it that I would use on a lot of things. So what I started to find out is They have the vocal strip, the drum strip, the dynamics channel, and the X comp. It's so funny because most of the plugins are compressors. They have one EQ, and I use this EQ more than anything digital. If you're going to buy something, I would highly recommend this. The EQ on this alone is so better. It's so much better than so many things that I've heard. It just has a sound to it, and this is when you have something that imparts a sound. It lines up with the EQ we have in the X-Rack, actually, and it sounds very, very close. If I was going to invest money in hardware, I would start with compressors and finish with EQs. Because what I want to say about compressors is, I think to this day, even though we have supercomputers out there, a compressor is a hard thing to replicate. It is. And I know an EQ is a hard thing to replicate, and universal audio and stuff like that, these guys need respect for what they're doing. It's amazing what they do, so buy their plugins. But let's talk about the dynamic channel. A lot of times on vocals in a session, I'll use a 7:1 ratio, and I'll control the threshold. What I hear in compression with a great set of monitors is you hear the sound start to become focused. Attack and release should be set creatively before technically, in my opinion. You start to hear, you know, the beginning of his voice start to pop out, or you start to hear the end of the vocal start to smooth down a little bit and not just be so elongated. We use gates as long as compressors. A lot of people don't understand this, but in mixing we use gates a lot more than mastering, because we're not really gating a whole song in mastering. But when you gate sounds before they get to me, and you do this right, and you create the perfect attack and release for each individual instrument, that's when we know you start to become a professional engineer. You have this professional sound to it. You don't know what it is, but most of the albums that we work on, it starts with that. I want to end with this. If you don't know how to compress something, it's better for you to not compress anything at all. It's like if you don't have anything nice to say, just don't say it. I'm just telling you the truth. It's almost you're better to not touch compressors if you don't know how to compress. And it took me, I would say, 7 years of my life to learn how to compress the way I can now. So like when I send back a song, some dude's like, "What? This sounds incredible." I grew up working on very poor recordings, and a lot of them were my own. So I know how to solve problems in poor recordings. But at the end of the day, we all want that great sounding, amazing track. And I think more than ever today, I can make that happen. And I thank God for it, because I think I'm getting a lot of business because I try, number one, to do the videos and teach people. Two, I'm very honest with this stuff. I don't want to rip you off. I don't want to take your money and be like, "Thanks, man, I appreciate it." I work hard for people, man, and I go 100% into them. I don't care if you're Jay-Z or if you're, you know, a guy we've never heard of. But screw that. Let's keep talking about the compression. Let's talk about finalizing settings in a mastering situation. If you do want to do this at home. So if you've stuck around for the rest of the video, I'm going to give you some tips. Number one, in hip-hop, a lot of times put an EQ before the compressor. Just try this at your house. It's pretty cool. EQ, compressor. If you EQ, start paying attention. Hip-hop usually has a low end that's huge, then it starts to come down around 200 hertz to 400 hertz. Don't take that out too much or it'll just sound like Shrillville. And then it comes back up. So 250 hertz, a trick for you guys to try at home. Find a multi-band compressor. Solo out the band from 200 hertz to 400 hertz. Listen to it. Practice doing this. Set the threshold most of the time a little bit wider, so it's like, I think it would be in that mind like 4:1. And then the ratio, set the ratio 4:1, and then the threshold, start to control it down until you hear that vocal, and then all that muffling information in those ranges just becomes one, just becomes even. Just try this. And then set the attack until you hear the vocal pop out above it. Like just keep going, attack and release until you, and I'm talking very subtle, just do this at home. It's a great exercise. So you go attack and release back and forth, and you'll find this point where like the instrumentation in the vocal just sort of spreads itself a little bit. And let it go. Now, the trick to this is once you've hammered it that far with compression, you change the gain. So move the gain knob up until it's back even with the song. on solo it and listen to what happened. That is a huge, huge trick. I don't give away many tricks, but that's something I've learned through the years that really sticks out. And I think it'll allow you to start understanding what it really is to engineer, and why the engineer is more important than the equipment. Because everybody can buy a multiband, right? So once again, this is a meet and greet back. How to use compressors. I really just didn't explain like what settings or anything. I want you to understand each compressor has its own settings, has its own sound. We use the Dangerous for transparency. We use the Maslick for a fix-all, and the sound of Maslick equipment is second to none. I've never heard anything better. And the Manley is used for warming up a song, or being able to glue together a rock song like that and make it better for everything from small systems to big systems. We use the bus compressor for a lot of hip-hop and EDM to add that extra punch and clarity and definition to a song, and we use that like a mix bus before we hit the final master. We purchased the Symphony I/O because it is a very, very, very high-end converter, and it allows us to listen to the Focals and the JBLs. In the room that we have, we've spent thousands of dollars, man, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I don't care if you're in a multi-million-dollar building or if you're in your dad's basement. Everybody has the same thing they can do. They can spend money on their room, unless your dad tells you no. They can spend time and effort with monitor placement, and they can continue to grow. If you're going to ever buy anything that considers you professional, you can use all plugins, but I'm going to recommend this to you guys. Converters, speakers in your room. Because those three things, once you get that right, your job becomes better, because now you can actually do your job. It's almost like this, you know, you're showing up, a lot of guys are showing up to a multi-million-dollar job, you know, wearing jeans. And it's like the same principle. Over the years, you get to this point where you know you have to come in with this professional. If I want to work with professionals, I got to have some professional stuff. I had to, you know, make my way for myself as an independent studio and an independent artist. So I understand the guys that don't have the money at this time. I pray to God you guys make a living. I don't want to see anybody that works with me not make a living, and I'll do anything in my power to help that happen. So my name's Doug Jenkins. I mix N, letter N, master.com. If you ever want to work with me, man, I'm always around. We keep booking people. We're like five to six people a week, and I thank God for every last one of you. Keep watching the YouTube videos, and I'm going to keep making them. So, I gotta go. It was Compressor Friday.